Welcome to 12th GMAT Masterclass. This class is dedicated to chronic constipation, a case-based discussion. And for this, we have lectured from the respected teacher, Professor B.S. Ramakrishna. And we have got moderator, Dr. Kalyan Bose, who is a senior gastroenterologist at Woodlands Multi-Specialty Hospital. Moreover, he is the president of ISG West Bengal chapter. We have got two panelists, Dr. N.P. Bahidar, who is a senior gastroenterologist, R.N. Tagore International Institute of Cardiac Sciences, and Dr. Sujit Chaudhary, who is my senior colleague and senior consultant gastroenterology in AMRI Group of Hospitals. So I would request Dr. Kalyan Bose to officially take over the proceedings of the meeting and introduce Professor B.S. Ramakrishna to this viewer. Over to Dr. Kalyan Bose, please.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Sudipto. Dr. B.S. Ramakrishna is the director and senior consultant at the Institute of Gastroenterology and Hepatology and the transplant unit at the SRM Institute of Medical Sciences in Chennai. He's been the president of ISG 2011-2012 with over 150 publications with tumbling accolades from lectures. He co-authors chapters in Schlesinger and Fortran's textbook of gastroenterology and hepatology. He is also the adjunct professor at Yale University School of Medicine, which is in New Haven, Connecticut, USA. Need I say more? His journey in the medical profession started at the CMC Vellore, where he, after finishing his MBBS, he did the MD, MNA, MS, DM, where he soon rose to become the professor of gastroenterology and head the clinical gastroenterology and hepatology division. His interest in basic sciences led him to the PhD degree from Madras University in 1992. It is an honor and privilege to welcome his lead participation at this GMAS conference on constipation. And we all look forward to benefiting enormously from his profound knowledge in the subject. Over to you, Professor Ramakrishna.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Sujit Chaudhary, and thank you, Dr. Kalyan Bose, for inviting me to speak here. So I'm going to basically talk about chronic constipation, and it will be somewhat case-based. So first, views on this. So you have here three kind of scenarios. Here's a 48-year-old man with a bowel movement once in 2 days. But he complains that his major problem, he feels that bowel evacuation is incomplete. There's a 40-year-old woman who goes to the toilet 10 times a day, but she says no stool comes out. And then we have this 23-year-old woman who has a bowel movement once in 3 or 4 days. So all of these patients actually have constipation. Even though this person here who's second goes to the toilet 10 times a day, she also has constipation. So the Indian Consensus on Chronic Constipation, which was published last year in the Indian Journal of Gastroenterology, and this is in keeping with what you used to find in the Rome 3 criteria, which is that constipation should be defined by the patient's perception rather than by the stool frequency. So typically for patients with bowel disorders, either constipation or diarrhea, typically just designed for IBS patients, we use the Bristol stool chart, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Type 4 essentially being normal, type 1 being the Pelletier stool, and type 7 being the entirely liquid stool. And this is something that we always keep at the clinic and show to the patients. and get their opinion on what their stool form is like. Now, if you look at Western definition, the Rome definition of constipation, it says only the Bristol stool types 1 and 2 fit with constipation. But here we have said that in India, stool types 1 to 3 are more common in Indian patients with constipation. So a person with primary constipation has a multiple other complaints. So they may complain of infrequent bowel movements. They may complain of hard stools. They may complain of excessive straining. There may be a feeling of anorectal obstruction. And this is anorectal obstruction is different from incomplete bowel evacuation. So here, when you go to pass stool, you feel there's something blocking. Incomplete bowel evacuation is after you've finished, you feel that there's something left behind. Then a lot of people use digital maneuvers and abdominal bloating. So it's good to ask all these questions when you face a patient with constipation. The Rome 4 criteria typically is what we use now for functional constipation. So it should have 2 or more of these 6 things. Less than 3 bowel movements a week, straining, lumpy stools, blockage, incomplete defecation, manual maneuvering in more than 25%. For functional constipation, the patient should IBS. That is, they should not have abdominal pain. They should not have loose stools unless they are using laxatives. So again, in this Indian consensus of chronic constipation, which we had, we said that functional constipation and IBS, constipation type IBS, predominant IBS, are differentiated by the absence or presence of abdominal pain. So basically, when you think of constipation, think along these lines. There is primary constipation, where there is no other obvious cause which is there for the constipation. We used to call this habitual constipation. Now it's kind of subdivided into normal transit, slow transit, defecatory disorders, and mixed types. And then there's secondary constipation, which we're all familiar with, and I'll show you that in the next slide. And then there is constipation predominant IBS, which we talked about just now, and which I'm not going to really deal with in this talk. So secondary constipation, and sorry, the drug should not have been here. So secondary constipation can be due to drugs, like for instance, opioids, antidepressants, anti-Parkinson agents, metabolic, which we see very commonly, diabetes, hypothyroidism, disorders like eating disorders, Parkinson disease, very importantly, paraneoplastic syndromes, and neuropathy. So let's look at primary constipation in a little more detail. I'm not going to deal with secondary constipation because there basically what you have to do is to identify the cause and then correct that. So here we have, let me start with this case, which is a 48-year-old man. And actually all of these are representative of patients who came to us within the last month or two. So this is a 48-year-old man. When he came, he was complaining of constipation for the last 5 years, and he was passing stool once in 2 days. The stool was type 2 to 3 on the Bristol stool form scale. And just to remind you, this is what that stool form scale was like, that type 2 to 3. This patient also had abdominal pain and anal burning at onset, but he wasn't complaining of that now. Sleep was poor, and general and abdominal examination were normal. Can I ask the moderators if they'd like to comment on this case?
Yeah, who's going to go first? Sujit?
Dr. Bohidar, can you just...
Yeah.
this is a fairly common situation that we come across, and for proceeding for the examination, before that we have to take a little more of history, and we have to rule out the secondary causes of constipation here. And then I think the abdominal examination that should also include the rectal digital examination a little in detail. Is that Dr. Chaudhary?
Okay. So this is probably the patient is having primary, that is idiopathic constipation. He is suffering from more than 5 years, and this is a middle-aged man. So there is no significant weight loss, and there is no history suggestive of any that is red flag signs like weight loss, anemia, or at least the GI blood loss. There is no, but there is probably he is also anxious, and there is maybe associated some anxiety and sleep disorder. So primarily we should diagnose this as a primary or idiopathic constipation. And then what Dr. Bohidar has said, digital rectal examination is must for when you are facing that, is that we have to exclude the perianal disease, and we have to exclude the distal rectal lesions to produce constipation. And then we should approach the diagnostic part. The basic the diagnostic, we should do the routine biochemical test like blood sugar, thyroid test, and also the hemogram. That is most important. And we should do a routine ultrasonography. And then there is no indication for colonoscopy, you can give the therapy. We can consider the therapy, and then we can discuss. I will discuss probably that what is the approach. And I'm not going. I wanted to know how should I want to explain that. What should be the diagnosis and what should be our approach for management?
So, thank you, Dr. Sujit. So if I can just take it from here. So the digital rectal examination, this is for the PGs who are listening in. Essentially, inspection, look for hemorrhoids, fissures, scars, skin excoriation. The digital examination just look for fissure, stricture, mass, stool, and rectal sensation. And basically, this is where you look. So here is the external anal sphincter, and above that is the internal anal sphincter. And the third part of the continence mechanism is the puborectalis, and then it comes back here. And you will see that above that is the rectum again. So that is very important to assess these components. And I'll talk about that a bit later when we come to a different kind of patient. So in this patient, I think as Dr. Sujit said, it's very important to look for all the, and as both Dr. Bohidar and Dr. Sujit said, it's very important to look for all the causes of secondary constipation, exclude them. That, of course, we expect that you'll do in the history and physical findings. So here, the rectal sphincter tone was normal. The squeeze pressure was normal. You ask the patient to squeeze, and you can feel that. And you ask the patient to push, and the sphincter relaxed. So there wasn't any problem with that. And again, Dr. Sujit was very correct that really here there's no specific indication for colonoscopy, but this patient had come to us with these investigations actually when he came to us. He had a colonoscopy which was normal up to the terminal ileum. He had a SIDS study which was normal. Now, what is the SIDS marker? Basically, we used to do this before. We used to have these radio-opaque tubes, which we used to cut into rings like this and ask the patient to swallow. That was used for transit studies. But here it's now given in a capsule, 24 such radio-opaque markers. So the patient swallows it, and you take a plain There are many different ways of doing it, but in the typically what is described in the SIDS marker study is an X-ray after 5 days. If more than 5 markers are retained, it's taken as a prolonged colonic transit time. And anorectal manometry was normal. So maybe Dr. Boidar or Dr. Kalyan, would you like to comment on SIDS marker studies? Do you use them in your practice?
Marker studies, the radiopaque marker. Can you hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can hear you.
I think Shujit uses these radio marker studies for transit, and I suppose if after 5 days you still have more than 20% of the markers, then the transit is slow. I don't know if Shujit does these radioisotopes. I think the marker studies, if one does them, they are enormously beneficial to know if somebody's colon is slow or there's something else going on. Manometry, again, Shujit does to identify dyssynergic defecation, rectal hypersensitivity, or even. But the person who I think is best to answer this question would be Shujit, because that is his domain.
Sorry, sir. Actually, excuse me, sir. Actually, we are doing the marker study according to the Dr. Ghoshal's protocol. Actually, there is some modification. What Sir Dr. Krishna has said that you can do it in a one go. Then you are giving the radiopaque marker and doing the X-ray after 5 days. But because of our colonic transit in Indian population is slightly different, non-transit, probably we have a higher transit because of higher mortality. So that Dr. Ghoshal has modified, and we found that this is more appropriate, and we are doing it, and we are giving 20 markers every 12 hours. So within the one capsule containing 20 markers. So it is given every 12 hours. So 36 hours, then the patient swallows the total 60 markers. And then we do the X-ray after 3rd day and after 5th day. So then if we count the markers, so if it is found that after 3rd day, if it is the number is around more than 18, more than 12, I think, and if it is more than 6 after 5 day, so then we said it is a slow transit constipation. And if the transit is normal, then it is idiopathic. There is a normal transit constipation. But and also you can have an idea if all the markers are uniformly distributed, so it is slow transit. But if all the markers are found in the pelvic cavity, so it is likely to be dyssynergic defecations. You can have an idea. So we are doing the marker, but not very frequently because there is a problem of availability of the marker to prepare this marker. But it is a very simple test. It needs an only X-ray and these radiopaque markers of different types, so that you can identify. You are giving the capsule in to every 12 hours 3 types. So we have this design of these markers in differently. Some is in the square like ring, what is shown in the picture, and some in the cubes, and some in the circles like that, so that you can identify what is the transit of the markers, what is given in the first, and what is the transit of the markers, what is given in the last. So there is some modification. We are following it. I think Sir will agree for that.
Absolutely. So yeah, the original method was described
and the manometry.
Sorry, the original method was described by John Cummings of measuring whole gut transit time. And as you rightly said, there were 3 different shapes that we used to give and monitor X-rays multiple times. And that was modified for Indian guts, because compared to a whole gut transit of 72 hours in Western subjects, here the whole gut transit is 24 hours. But here the question is, as you say very rightly, the distribution is very important. If it is throughout the colon, then it's slow transit. If it's all bunched up on one side, on the left side, then it's more like a defecatory disorder. But it's probably useful in some. But this patient had this test done and he came to us. So basically he was treated with lactitol, polyethylene glycol, and then we added procalcipride. So he went from having bowel movements once in 2 days to 2 bowel movements a day. Still, he kept remaining, he was not unsatisfied at all. He felt he was only evacuating 50% of the stool. And since he had actually been going from doctor to doctor. So these are the troubled ones with constipation. That they keep moving from doctor to doctor because they're not really happy with what's happened. And so we can just look at some of the aspects of defecation here. Basically, this is what resting, the sigmoid and the rectum, and here the puborectalis sling from the pubic symphysis. It holds it up. So you can see that acute angle here. The external internal sphincters contract and that maintains constant continence. During defecation, what happens is this acute angle, the puborectalis relaxes so that this acute angle becomes obtuse. And then the external and internal sphincters relax. There's pressure from above and there's defecation. So that is typically what you will see in an MR defecogram. So here at rest, so this is the spine, the coccyx. Here's the pubic symphysis. Here's the rectum, and then you see here where there's an acute angle, that's the puborectalis sling holding it up there. So when you squeeze, try to basically prevent the stool coming out. And so here the puborectalis contracts and you can see this moves up, becomes more acute. During evacuation, this angle becomes obtuse. And in dyssynergic defecation, there's a paradoxical contraction. So instead of relaxing, when you ask the patient to pass stool, it contracts. The puborectalis pulls it up and you get a more acute angle. And there's an extensive descent of the perineal muscles. So this is the slide is taken from Dr. Bharucha's paper in 2019, or his review in 2019. Essentially, this at rest with blue is the low pressure. So the green is slightly higher pressure, red is the highest, and yellow is somewhere in between. So the anal sphincter, when the person squeezes, the sphincters contract, the pressure goes up. I'm sorry. During evacuation, so there is an increase in pressure here in the rectum, and this pressure reduces here. So from yellow, it becomes greenish. So the pressure in the sphincter relaxes, there's evacuation. In people with dyssynergic defecation, there's a paradoxical contraction. The pressure goes up, even though there is pressure here. Some patients, this pressure may not be generated, so they decrease propulsive force, even when the sphincter is partly relaxed. And there can be a combination of decreased propulsive force and a paradoxical contraction. These are patterns you see in dyssynergic defecation. So here, this patient, we said that he had this problem of incomplete evacuation, feeling of incomplete evacuation. And here's his defecogram. So you can see here, the abdominal muscles are contracting. This acute angle becomes obtuse. The stool comes out. This thing plays over and over 2 or 3 times. So you'll see the stool coming out quite well. So this is the rectal paste which comes out. Of course, this is done with the patient lying on his side. If you have an open configuration MRI, you can do it with the patient sitting up. But here, done with the patient lying on his side, not necessarily physiological. But that's what it tells us, that here the defecogram is normal. Dr. Sujit, you want to comment? You want to say anything?
MR
Sujit, I think that
MR difficograms are sometimes we have used it, we have done it, and for the defecatory disorder, definitely this is very much useful, and you can have an idea where is the site of obstruction, what is the function of the puborectalis, how whether there is any prolapse in the rectal wall and producing obstruction rectocele, or whether there is also associated genital descent, what is the pelvic descent. That can be, so there is a very useful test. We can do it either by barium and or by MR. MR is much more informative, but it is more expensive, and its availability is not widely possible. So, but and it is very difficult to arrange the difficography in the MR suite. But we have done few cases, and we have diagnosed and we have managed accordingly, and it has been found to be helpful. So for this patient, I think this is what you have shown this in the diagram. This was normal. So the MR difficulty was normal. Sir, one comment, sir. Actually, sorry, I just Ghosal's protocol of colonic transit study, the cutoff marker value, what I mentioned, that it is the X-ray is done after 36 hours and 60 hours, not 5 days, 60 hours, and the cutoff value of the ROC is 30 marker and 14, 30 and 14, I say wrongly. So if it is less than 30, it is normal after 36 hours, and if it is less than 14 after 60 hours, that is normal. If it is more than that, it is significantly abnormal.
Right. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. So here, essentially, this first patient represents what we can call normal transit constipation, which is the most common type of primary constipation we see. The colonic transit time was normal. The stool frequency was within the normal range. The main problem is incomplete evacuation. And unfortunately, there's a major overlap with the constipation predominant IBS. If you listen closely, this patient initially had some abdominal pain and anal burning sensation. And very often these people have some psychological distress. So this is normal transit constipation. And we'll talk about basically management at some point of time. It's essentially with a variety of drugs like the ones that were used already. So here's a second case, which is a young woman, a 20-year-old woman, with bowel movement once in 3 to 4 days. And the stool was a type 1 Pelleti stool. Now, the important thing about this Bristol stool chart, the person who described it is initially when the investigators did this, they showed that it correlated with transit time. So when stool is like this, the colonic transit is very prolonged. When stool is like this type 7, then the colonic transit is rapid. So the moment somebody tells us that they had Pelleti stool like this, we say that this person has a very prolonged colon transit time. So on examination, and this patient didn't have any obvious other things like hypothyroidism or diabetes or any of the other problems. Sigmoid colon was palpable on abdominal examination. The rectal examination was normal. And we did a panel of blood tests which were within normal limits. I wonder if Dr. Kalyard or Dr. Boidar would like to comment.
Again, going back to the theme that one has to first exclude in a 20-year-old without red flag signs. In a 20-year-old, it's very unlikely that she's going to have any red flag signs for a start, but she appears to have true constipation. Varies in what sort of diet does she take, what sort of medication is she on? Because I find that in the Western world, it's the patient lives here. So it's still possible that she's on various medications which could be contributing to the constipation. So we'll have to go through the history of what sort of diet she's taking, what medication she's on, and how long she's had this constipation. By chronic, I suppose we mean she's had it for a few years, which would make the appearance of red flag signs unlikely. That means she doesn't have red flag signs. I just presume that that's the case. So once we've done all the examination, I would go ahead and treat her, having done some baseline investigations. But he said the blood tests are normal. If the blood tests are normal, then I'm happy to actually start her with the first line treatment, which is basically looking at her diet, looking at her habits, whether she has a reasonable amount of exercise, whether she gives time to her defecation, whether she has the proper habits, and take it from there.
So, Dr. Kalyan, let me ask you,
Yeah.
Do you think that this is a failure, or that they have learned their bowel? You see, normally we learn to move your bowel once a day, perhaps, when you are young. Your mother makes you do that, right?
Yeah.
And I have a feeling very often that as these children go through school, they get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to rush to school because they have to travel a long distance. They don't eat anything in the morning. They probably suppress their bowel movement, and the whole thing changes. So I think of it as an unlearning of bowel habits. Do you think that's correct, or
Absolutely.
Is that your experience also?
I've had my children grow up, and their diet was terrible. They would eat something which has no roughage in it, and they would refuse to go to the toilet because it was an embarrassment. So they develop such bad habits that they tend to suppress and ignore their physiological demands, which often leads to that. And certainly in the West, the youngsters are very constipated because they eat only hamburgers and fries, and with no vegetables, no fruits, nothing.
But can I comment, sir?
Yes.
So actually, probably these 20-year-old woman who is suffering from chronic constipation and passing pellet-like stool every alternate 3 to 4 days interval, and when there is a palpable the schibulous stool in the colon, so rectal examination is normal. So probably she is having this classical slow transit constipation. So then to confirm the diagnosis, okay, definitely you can try initially with the lifestyle, diet and everything, and probably these will not be helpful for her, but probably she has tried all these. Then we have to confirm that it is probably slow transit constipation, and that the best test is that what we have described, that the colonic transit study can be done, and there is no history suggestive of dyssynergic defecation, so that I think that the manometry and other tests, defecography, may not be helpful or may not be required for this patient or lady. Yes, and then definitely we have to think the management protocol, and probably she may need much more than the lifestyle, diet and others.
So sometimes I tell these young people when they come that they should relearn their bowel habits. Like Dr. Bose was saying, basically that they need to take more fiber. They need to have a more relaxed lifestyle. They probably need to drink plenty of water. They need to get up every morning and then make an attempt to pass stool, so that if they get back into that original rhythm of once a day. it works with some, it doesn't work with others, but I think it's definitely worth a try. So here, as we said, so we have our own transit markers. So basically what we have is we have some barium impregnated polyvinyl tubes with us, which we cut, and then we put that in a capsule and give it. And essentially, here you can see the, as Dr. Suresh was saying some time back, markers distributed throughout the colon, which, as he said, is very typical of slow transit constipation. So the thing with slow transit constipation is typically described in young women, infrequent bowel movements. They don't have the urge to go to the toilet. That is basically, it's a suppression of the urge to go to the toilet. So there is abdominal bloating. There may be palpable stool in the sigmoid. So it's a dysfunction of the colonic smooth muscle activity, dysfunction of the reflexes which are there. So I try to make use of the gastrocolic reflex. In fact, I tell them, get up in the morning, have fiber at night, get up in the morning, drink 500 ml of warm water, walk around a bit, and then try and evacuate. So that's to try to make use of the gastrocolic reflex. And there may be problems with neurotransmitters or the colonic pacemaker activity. So here's another case, which is basically, this is a 37-year-old man. Again, he also complained of constipation, bowel movement once in 2 days. He has to sit for 15 to 20 minutes on the toilet. This is something that you should always ask your patients, how long they sit. And he often uses the finger to clear the rectum. And would anyone like to comment? Dr. Boida, you've been silent.
Very clear cut that she is using her finger to evacuate the stools from the rectum. That means it's a defecatory disorder. That means the stool is coming to the rectum, is all right, and probably the transit time is okay. And what is the problem in this case is the muscles are not acting in proper fashion, and that's why there is a defecatory disorder probably. So,
right. Okay. So defecatory disorders, again, they are characterized by significant straining, spending a long time on the toilet. So any of the manual maneuvers, they can use a finger, they can change their position. Some patients will come and tell you that I adopted this position to pass through and so on. And sometimes nowadays with the health faucets which are available next to the toilet, people are using that to put a jet of water into their rectum to clear it. So laxatives generally are highly effective in this condition. And this is also often from childhood, suggesting an impaired learning of defecation. So we looked a little while back at this figure, which is, say, normal defecation. Here's the spine again, here's the pubic symphysis. The rectum, the continence mechanisms are here. The puborectalis sling and the sphincters. This should normally relax at the time of defecation and make this an obtuse angle. In dyssynergic defecation, there may be a prolonged colonic transit. There may be discoordination of the abdominal and the pelvic floor muscles. There may be rectal hyposensitivity. There's a paradoxical increase in sphincter pressure. So you see here, during defecation, instead of becoming obtuse, this angle is becoming more acute because the puborectalis contracts. There's an inadequate anal relaxation and inadequate abdominorectal propulsive forces. So here, this is a condition where rectal examination is very important. So here we talked about this, that the external sphincter, the internal sphincter, and the puborectalis sling. main thing here in dyssynergic defecation is to ask the patient to push. The external sphincter should relax, the puborectalis should relax, so the perineum will descend, and the abdominal muscles tighten. So people who studied this say that this has great specificity for dyssynergic defecation. So if one or more of these responses are absent, then that is dyssynergic defecation. So here in the defecatory disorders or the fecal evacuation disorders, the inability to coordinate the abdominal, rectoanal, and pelvic floor muscles during defecation, reduced propulsive force, impaired anal relaxation. Very often there's a weak pelvic floor, there may be a rectocele, excessive perineal descent, and solitary rectal ulcers. And there are more generalized transit disorders or motility disorders in the gut. So anorectal manometry is most useful in this group of patients. Basically, you look at sphincter tone, resting and squeeze, rectoanal reflexes, rectal sensation, and pressure change during attempted defecation. And in this patient, basically, you can have either this type 1 or a type 2, where type 1 is where the pressure in the rectum increases, but the anal sphincter contracts. Here, the propulsive force is weak, but still the anal sphincter contracts, but it's not as strong as here. So both patterns, because there's not enough to push it against that, the stool doesn't come out. So one of the tests that we don't use, or there are some people who use it, is the balloon expulsion test. You take a balloon, fill it up with 50 ml of tepid or lukewarm water, and ask the patient to evacuate. So they should, normally it should come out in less than 2 minutes. If it takes longer than that, that is diagnostic of defecatory disorder. Can I just again ask our moderators whether any of them would like to comment? Balloon expulsion tests, does anybody use it? Or do you guys use it?
And actually, we are not very accustomed to do this regularly. I doubt if many people are doing it.
If anybody does it, Sujit will be doing it.
Actually, sir, can I comment, sir? Balloon expulsion test is a very simple test, and it is not cumbersome at all, and it gives a lot of information. Definitely, to diagnose the fecal evacuation disorder like dyssynergic defecation, this is almost considered as a gold standard. So it should be done, and it can be done easily. And when we are doing manometry, and even without manometry, you can do it. It is just, it needs a balloon with a catheter, and just you have to record how much time the patient is to evacuate the 50 ml of filled this tepid water balloon filled, that it simulates like this stool, and then if the patient cannot pass within 2 minutes, so it is positive. So this is done along with anorectal manometry, and from the anorectal manometry give much more information like the basal sphincter pressure, then what is the anorectoanal inhibitory reflex, and also the squeeze. So if there is any sphincter dysfunction, and also the evacuation disorder can be when you are when asking the patient to evacuate, whether the sphincter is relaxing or not, as sir has described, whether it is type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4. So the balloon expulsion test is easy to do, and it should be performed to objectively diagnose that it is a defecatory disorder.
So I believe the negative predictive value is 97%.
So I think it's
right. Okay. So we saw this again. I just want to remind you that of these angles, the paradoxical contraction and the excessive descent, because again, these are things that you can see on the MRT echogram. So here you can see in this patient that the is straining, but nothing moves. The angle becomes more acute here, and the puborectalis, it just doesn't open up at all. So this is the pattern that we see here. So finally, we have another case, which is a 47-year-old lady with constipation of long standing. She goes to the toilet 10 times a day, but doesn't pass stool. And that's the main problem. So she uses a finger, she uses a water jet to clear the colon. She passes mucus and occasional blood in the stool. No abdominal pain. She is multiparential, but she is both babies delivered by cesarean section. Colonoscopy had been done elsewhere, and at that time she was found to have a solitary rectal ulcer. So any comments again from our moderators?
Kolanda, can I comment, sir?
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
Sir, actually, so this lady having the problem, probably it is a dysynergic defecation, Sam, and it is more complicated with rectal ulcer. The mechanism for etiology of rectal ulcer is exactly still maybe some ischemia and other thing that because of the dysmotility, there is stasis and stagnation and producing rectal ulcer. So this is really a complicated problem of constipations, and many, even not only in the young ladies and middle-aged ladies, we are facing the problem of managing this solitary rectal ulcer. It is a chronic disabling problem, and sometimes the patient having significant blood loss with anemia, and sometimes there is a problem of management, difficult to manage also. So, but this is probably is a part of the dysynergic defecation and associated with another complication, that is the solitary rectal ulcer.
May I ask some question?
Yeah.
I think the cesarean sections that has been done twice has to do something with the nerve injury of that local. Yeah. Is that so? I think.
What do you think? Normally, multiparous women, we think that there may be pelvic floor injury. And that's one reason why they have this problem. But she had cesareans. I don't know whether nerve injury during a cesarean section will affect the muscles which are involved in the continence down below. Okay. So here again we have a echogram. So basically you can see that straining, it comes down below this level. So there is a rectocele. There is an anterior rectocele and a small rectocele here. So this again is like dysynergic defecation, very clearly dysynergic defecation. So before I go to the so managing these patients is actually somewhat difficult. We'll come to management. I've just got basically some more statements on the algorithm for these patients, which is one is that the good history and digital examination are necessary. And we've said that the balloon expulsion test manometry, defecography, etc. are useful. Prolonged straining and incomplete evacuation is characteristic of a defecatory disorder. Lifestyle factors, systemic illnesses, drugs, etc. These all contribute to chronic constipation. Now, just coming to psychological issues, they are common in patients with chronic constipation. 40 to 60% will have anxiety, depression, or insomnia. Can I ask again the moderators, how do you treat these patients?
Or just constipation in general, you mean?
Yeah, so we have these three types of constipation.
Yeah.
And then almost, except probably for the slow transit constipation, the others definitely have much more. The one with the defecatory disorders have very significant psychological issues.
Yeah.
How do you treat them? Do you treat them yourself? Do you send them to a psychiatrist?
Yeah, Shujit.
Sir, definitely. Sometimes the first advice should be what we have discussed, that the dietary modification, the lifestyle, the stress avoid, and these are the important factors. Whether that is the first line of management protocol, that you have diagnosed as a primary constipation, that is idiopathic, and then if the patient is not improving with the food, diet, and the exercise and other thing, then we have to think of the first line of therapy with laxative. And if the patient is not responding to laxative, that there are different types of laxative that we can discuss, but commonly is the osmotic laxatives are used. And then if the patient is not improving, then we should go for the investigations to categorize the constipation by colonic transit study. And if it is suggestive of defecatory dysfunction, you have discussed that we should do the anorectal manometry and defecography, and with anorectal manometry with balloon expulsion test and defecography. Then after categorization, we have to go for the management. So these are the groups which are difficult to manage. So if it is really a slow transit constipation, we should try the further second line of drug therapy for that is cholokinetics, and with laxatives, even combination therapy. And then sometimes you may face that the patient, even then the patient is not responding, then the rarely slow transit constipation may require surgical management. But before going to that, we should exclude the upper GI dysmotility disorders, and even by the small bowel dysmotility disorders as a part of the generalized dysfunctions, autonomic dysfunctions. Then it will be difficult then you should not go to select a patient for surgery. You should exclude other factors. And for the normal transit constipation, definitely the laxatives, and then the newer drugs like cholokinetics. And for fecal evacuation disorder, you have already explained that we should try with the different maneuvers, lifestyles, and usually the laxatives are not helpful. Then there is a role for the training, bowel training, the evacuation. But if you can identify the any anatomical problem by defecography, then we can go for surgery. But otherwise, the biofeedback has a significant role, that you have to teach the patients, that patient can learn the process of defecation, how to strain, how to relax the sphincter. That is called biofeedback, and that can be an option for this group of patients who are difficult to manage. So this is, I think.
For the anxiety part and the depression part, usually we give initially some anxiolytic drugs or antidepressants, but later on, if we cannot manage with some minor kind of treatment, we prefer to refer to the psychiatrist, but not at the first go, because there is a social taboo. They will be not liking it. The patient won't be liking this.
Okay, absolutely. But there's the psychological issues are also need to be addressed, because that seems to help a lot of them. And if we can do it with small doses of things like either whatever tricyclics or SSRIs or SNRIs, then they seem to do well.
I suppose the reason is maybe largely that people who are anxious and depressed and insomniac, they tend not to eat, ignore their bodily functions, drink less, eat less, move less, which is partly contributing to their constitution. So
Yes.
I think that's right. People with anxiety and depression, insomnia, whatever, we need to actively correct that and then see where it gets us, advise them on diet, ask them to stick to a diet a bit more regularly, drink lots of fluids, move about and do everything. And I suppose that would work to some extent. Actually, I'm sitting here feeling very guilty that I don't do any of the tests that you and Shujit have been elaborating. I do a balloon expulsion, and this is quite scandalous in your view. But actually,
I suspect that's why Dr. Sujit Chaudhary organizes.
No, Dr. Bose, I am with you. Don't worry.
I'm feeling terrible that I was dragged into this conference where I treat all my patients with just giving them advice, dietary advice more, and maybe osmotics and as he was saying, holokinetics, prucalopride and all that. But my business just ends there. And which I suppose is a very bad way of treating people with this. But actually, most of my patients get better with just that. But the difficult ones remain difficult, yes. And they really need somebody like Shujit in Calcutta. I think we need. The take home for me. I know the conference hasn't ended, but I've been constantly feeling that there should be more people like Shujit around who we can refer all these patients to.
Yes, absolutely. The refractory ones really need specialist attention. I think that's right. So I'll just come to this last slide here. So you have somebody with chronic constipation. As you said, the first thing is that you really don't need to investigate them, that you need to look to see if they have any alarm features, which requires major investigation. Otherwise, I remember, in the old days, Dr. Tandon used to say, you never over-investigate these patients. So basically, there you supplement dietary fiber intake, add laxatives. And laxatives, there's a wide variety. There's osmotic laxatives. There's fiber, which I still like, and particularly I think I like it for patients with the constipation predominant IBS. Then there's all kinds of other things which increase bowel secretion or act on motility. So, but with this, probably 90% of patients settle down, they learn to adjust with the constipation. So if they don't respond to this, then you go ahead with the balloon expulsion test, ideally. I know here in Chennai, probably there may be one place which does this, and then there's anorectal manometry, which we can do. So if these two are normal, then you treat with a secretory agent. And in fact, most people here itself, they will be taking things like Churan and so on, which are basically very mild secretory agents. So here you can have something more potent And then you can go on to medicines like linaclotide, which stimulate chloride secretion. So here too, if they don't respond, then you do a colonic transit study. If that is slow, you call it, so this is really for the refractory patient. So slow colonic transit becomes slow transit constipation. There you can go in for more irritant or more secretory medication. Very, very rarely these people may require a loop ileostomy or a colectomy or an ileorectal anastomosis. Now, this you will find in the list of recommendations in all the GI societies, that occasionally you may have to do this. But in actual fact, I think there would be only a handful of patients I've seen in my career who ever had any of these operations for constipation. So again, maybe I'll ask the moderators, what do they think? How frequently in a slow transit, you mentioned that in a slow transit constipation, sometimes you may need to do these operations. You want to comment?
Actually, sir, I have the experience of slow transit difficult to manage with all the therapy, and then we were forced to do the colectomy, subtotal colectomy with it was small bowel disorder or small bowel motility, and but still she is still under my follow-up regularly. But at present she is taking a minimum laxative requirement is much less. Particularly, she used to take again taking prucalopride, but definitely her life is better than before. So surgery has given some relief to her, but it is not completely cured. So only one have the experience who so we had to do my surgical colleague did surgery. It was not very difficult surgery, but this is my personal experience.
Right. So it is very extremely
And the
rare.
biopsy, the
Yeah.
colonic biopsy was showing that there is interstitial cells of Karl, so it's very scanty.
So
So it
it's a
is a
generalized motility disorder. Yeah.
generalized. Yeah.
Okay. So here again, these people, if the colonic transit is normal, then you treat them almost like a constipation predominant IBS. So here where the balloon expulsion test is abnormal, which is where we come to the defecatory disorder. If it is abnormal, clearly it becomes defecatory disorder. And then the treatment of choice is pelvic floor biofeedback. Now, unfortunately, there are not many centers which provide biofeedback. And it requires somebody who is, it requires space, and it requires a person who's very interested in doing that. But that really would be the treatment for these patients. And if that fails, then, and that should be the very, very rare patient who will require suppositories or enemas, or very rarely a loop ileostomy. So the place for defecography is here when this expulsion test and manometry are not conclusive. So you do a defecography. And if that is normal, then you call them a normal transit constipation. If that is abnormal, then you call it a defecatory disorder. So any comments again from our moderators? Because this is my last slide that I was.
That actually our experience of biofeedback is not very vast, and actually we had done a few cases, and the problem of this biofeedback that you needs very dedicated persons that who should be involved, and we have to teach the patients. It can be either visual and auditory, and particularly patient has to learn that the process of the defecation. And biofeedback, by showing the parameters by in the screen, the patient can learn that how to relax the sphincter and how to learn the exact. So it is a defecative disorder. To some extent is a learning process disorder, defecation. So that is being done. So, and today we have done a case, a young girl who came with she's 20 years old. She's having the problem of constipation for a long time. One of my colleagues referred me, and today I did, and I found that there is a real difficulty that she cannot, when she is pushing the balloon, she is just contracting the anal sphincter. So it is confirmed, and we have planned to give her to some sessions of biofeedback. But this is definitely maybe probably helpful feedback in this disorder, but definitely that should be the treatment, first line of therapy for when you have diagnosed that it is a really difficult disorder.
Govinda, you wanted to say something?
It's quite difficult to arrange for everybody. Simple tests which Dr. Chaudhary says, like this balloon expulsion test and other things. One has to be devoted in this. Even though we see a lot of cases of constipation in our day-to-day practice, many of us, I'm sorry to say that, do not have the mind or the intention, the enthusiasm to do these tests. I would not say all of them are very extremely difficult, but one has to arrange it. And so, we see Sujit is doing it very devotedly. Kalyanda?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It seems a very simple thing to organize, but I'm actually getting a bit motivated now that I will find out from Sujit what the details are, and I might at least start the balloon expulsion. I don't think I'm going to do any of the others. Balloon expulsion, certainly yes. And I had it in mind to start the markers for looking at slow transit. But if I have to feed them 3 times and at 12 hours 2 X-rays, then it's a bit more complicated than I initially thought. Initially, I thought that you just feed them the markers 1 time and you look at the X-rays later on. But in India, we've changed everything, and in India that doesn't work. So we have got to feed them different types of markers 12 hours apart and then take X-rays, which makes it slightly more complicated. I don't know, what is the ease, Sujit, with which you do about these radio-opaque markers going through the colon, now that you are having to do it 3 times and check X-rays after 60 hours and 1 of course before that? How complicated is it?
No, it's not very much complicated. Actually, what you have to do, this is commercially available, these capsules. So in a pack, there are 3 capsules, and each capsule contains 20 markers. So, and the markers, these have different shapes. So you are asking the patient, say at 8 p.m., he or she will swallow the first capsule. After, and next day 8 a.m. the second capsule, and then the 8 p.m. the third capsule, and then after a gap of, so this is in the span of 36 hours. So that this is within, so it is in the span of 24 hours. It is in the span of 24 hours. In between the 12 hours gap, he or she is swallowing 3 capsules, and the X-ray will be done at 36 hours. So next day, the X-ray will be done, and then another X-ray will be done at 60 hours. So there will be only 2 X-rays required, and the patient will swallow 3 capsules at an interval of 12 hours. And you have to count the this remaining that is and how many markers are left. So if the markers are left more than what I have said, that this after 36 hours and after 60 hours, then if it is significant, and what is the distribution, what is the number, then you can say, you can diagnose. And the cutoff value I have said that 30 and 40. So 36 hours cutoff is 30 and 60 hours cutoff is 40. So you have to do the only 2 X-ray, and the patient will swallow the 3 capsule at home. So you can ask the patient to after 36 hours. So you are giving the capsule in the evening, the next morning, and the next evening, and the day after. Then in the morning the patient will come, will do the X-ray, and another after 24 hours another X-ray. So say for the today he will take the capsule at 8 p.m. then 8 a.m. then and the next day 8 p.m. and next morning it is the 8 a.m. another X-ray, and the day after another X-ray. So
Okay.
only 2 X-ray will be.
Okay.
This capsule is cost of the you can prepare it, but it is now commercially available.
It's
So
not.
anybody can do it. Anybody can do it.
No, but the capsules, are they not commercially available?
It is available, commercially available.
Okay.
We are purchasing commercially from a person that it's available. It is cheaper. It is just about 1,000. They are taking 1,000 rupees. If you can prepare it, it's just a matter of only 100 or 200 rupees. Radio opaque, any radio opaque tube can be made and it can be put in the capsule. So it can be done by yourself also. But okay, it is cumbersome. Then as it is commercially available, you can purchase it, and only 2 X-ray will be done. So the total cost of this test will be not more than 2,000 rupees or like that.
Okay.
So actually, there was one of the companies, I think some meeting that we had, Abbott was proposing to get the SIDS markers and make them available to gastroenterologists in India. So I don't know whether they went through with that plan or not, but there was a bit of talk about it at that time.
Okay.
But we make our own, like Sujit said, using, we have some barium impregnated tubing, which is radio opaque, and we have that in different diameters. So we can get 3 different diameters, but they are all circular. They are not different shapes.
Okay.
So with that, I will end, I think, Sujit. And if there's anything that Dr. Bose or Dr. Boydar wish to add.
Sir, I want to know from you, sir. Really, a psychological issue is really important in the management of chronic constipation, and sometimes we are stamping the patients. Oh, it is a psychiatric disease or not. What should be our approach? That how should it? So that, and a group of patients maybe they are bothered about the bowel motion. So definitely we are explaining that okay, this is not it is not psychological disorder, okay, but you have to avoid anxiety. Just take care of your food and the diet and water intake and everything, and the lifestyle, exercise. But what should be the approach, that then the drug selections, the management, and the efficacy of these antipsychotic, anti-anxiety drugs? Just can you highlight, sir?
So I agree with Dr. Boydar that I don't usually send my patients to a psychiatrist because there is a social stigma and they are not really overtly in need of psychiatric treatment. It's only the ones who have very refractory problems where you might be considering, say, colectomy or something like that, that you need to send them to a psychiatrist. I'm sure that patient that you did subtotal colectomy on, you must have got a psychiatric opinion before going with a subtotal colectomy in that patient. But mostly what I tell my patients is firstly that there is a lot of serotonin in the gut. And many of the mild antidepressants that we use act on serotonergic nerves. and serotonergic transmission. And the doses at which we use them, they are probably more active on the enteric nervous system than on the central nervous system. When we use very small doses of tricyclics or SSRIs, and I generally find that helps control a lot of symptoms, whether it is the anxiety associated with that. In fact, I don't use anxiolytics much because of the issue with dependence in the long term.
Can I have the sir's opinion regarding the prucalopride that we are using, and why, any precautions, and what should be the dose, and whether we should be very careful about elderly patients?
How long? And how long?
Yeah.
Right. So, well, if you look at
Dr. Bhaidar has to answer you. You are.
Please.
See, when you suspect that there is a slow transit constipation, and maybe we need to give a prokinetic for the colon. And at the moment, the best one is probably prucalopride. And you must be having clinical experience that yes, it works. But it takes little time, maybe 2-3 weeks to initiate its action. I do not know how long it should be used. It's safe. There are many studies, of course, but I'd like to hear from Ramakrishna if it is safe to use for a long time.
Sure. So when Tegaserod was available, that was very good. And that would, particularly for slow transit constipation in women, I think Tegaserod was very good. But Tegaserod is now no longer available. And the only prokinetic which works on the colon, which is available to us, is prucalopride. So prucalopride typically people use. I've seen people use at so many different concerts. I mean, I've seen surgeons use it as 2 milligrams 3 times a day, which I think is really a huge dose. There are some patients who are extremely sensitive to prucalopride. That they take it for 1 day, and then they say, even with 1 day, with 1 dose, they have good bowel movement. Although we generally understand that it needs to reach a steady state before starting to work. So there's a lot of variation. So I prefer to start with, if a person is younger, then generally I would give 2 milligrams a day. If the person is above 60, generally I give 1 milligram a day. As to the question of how long to use it, very often the patient determines how long he or she wants to use it. In reality, that's what happens.
Thank you. So, Dr. Bose?
Yeah. Would you like me to end, or should we proceed to end this?
There is a question, sir, from the chat box. Can you?
I don't know. I can't see it.
There is a question from Dr. Chaudhuri, Abhijit Chaudhuri. The most of the antidepressant and anxiolytic cause constipation. Then how to proceed? Kolanda, can you see from the question from the chat box?
I can't see anything actually.
So I'm just reading the question that most of the antidepressant and anxiolytic can cause constipation. Then how to proceed? Can I answer?
Are you going to answer? Yeah, go ahead.
So actually, sir, okay. So, sir, definitely we know that antidepressants in the therapeutic dose can produce constipation. But when you are giving the antidepressant to the constipated patient, definitely you are giving the combination therapy. That is, you are giving some laxatives or cholokinetics, and along with that, to allay her anxiety or depression, you are giving in the lower dose. It is not so that probably the drug-induced constipation is different in this. I don't think that the management of these patients' problem is not due to the constipation due to the drug. So it is due to the constipation with some anxiety. So you are considering an anxiolytic or low-dose antidepressant in this group of patients.
Absolutely. We actually use very little. We use, I mean, for instance, if you were to use something like amitriptyline, we'd be using 25 milligrams. Whereas, if you're using that to treat depression, you're using doses like 100 or 150 milligrams.
Another question, so there is what pre-procedure preparation is required for SYS-marker study? Dr. Sharma has from Coimbatore.
There is no pre-preparation required for the SYS-marker study.
Only thing, the patient should avoid laxatives during and before just the study.
Yes,
Definitely,
yes.
definitely, yeah. That the patient should stop laxatives when we are doing the study at least few days earlier, and then the patient you will ask the patient to take the otherwise no other. I don't think that any other precautions are necessary for this study. Sir, okay, I think Kolanda, if there is no questions, and if anything, then Sudipto can.
Yeah, I think Sudipto has left. But by the way, just going to the other extreme, the balloon expulsion, does patient need to take a phosphate enema before you do the balloon expulsion study, or what?
Actually, for balloon expulsion study, no enema is required, but routinely for patients who are having constipation, if there is, if you feel that the patient is having the defecatory problem and passing hard stool, then just either saline enema or phosphate enema can be given before the procedure, and definitely the rectum should be empty when you are putting the balloon inside the rectum. So. Otherwise, that there will be false recording of the pressures, manometry will be difficult, and balloon expulsion will also be difficult. So it should be done. Definitely, the enema before the procedure should be done.
Okay. Okay. We've had a actually brilliant evening. I think Sudipto, if you could wind up.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Professor Ramakrishna, for the very detailed discussion on case-based presentation for constipation. And thank you, Dr. Koldan Bosch. You have done the discussion more interesting. Definitely, Dr. Bahidar and Dr. Shujit Chaudhary deserves a great round of applause for participating so actively during the discussion. I must say a single word that as I have walked with Dr. Chaudhary, and I know he has got a good passion for this anorectal manometry and motility studies. So I thought that he will be the best person to deal with this topic. And at the end, I would definitely thank our all the viewers for patient listening and make this evening a memorable one. I would like to invite Mr. Sharod Dash. Is he for giving Thanksgiving ceremony?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So could you say a few lines before we end up? Mr. Sharod Dash.
The problem with the connection is, I think.
Yeah, I think then if the connection is a problem, I think then we can wind up the session for today. And I hope that we have a series of webinars for last 12 sessions, which have been very interesting and very useful. And I hope that we will do some more in the next year to come. And advance Happy New Year to everybody. Thank you very much, everybody.
And,
Happy New Year to
and
everybody. Yes.
And
Thank you.
sir, thank you very much. And we are so happy, and it is our from the GMAS. GMAS is an organization now. We are doing some scientific activities and also social services. So it is an so GMAS is a gastroenterology and minimal access surgeon. So we are a group of doctors who have formed it, and we are doing. And on behalf of GMAS, I want to thank you very much, sir, for your
It's a pleasure.
participation in this meeting.
Thank you. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, sir.
Good night.
Good night.